Welcome, AP Economics students. Today we are going to be reviewing Units 2 and 3. Unit 2, if you remember, is the measurement of economic performance, and Unit 3 is called National Income Determination. It is fiscal policy. Okay, so on this Google slide here, this is my Reader's Digest version, the most important things that you need to take out of Unit 2 and Unit 3. And especially when I'm thinking about a macroeconomics exam that the College Board is going to be creating specifically for online learning, I feel like a lot of emphasis is going to be put on these measurement of economic performance and fiscal policy in general. So let's take a look at the slide. Please bring your attention. Let's start here, measurements of economy. Okay, so in Unit 2, there are three big general ways that we measure the economy. We measure the first one with gross domestic product. It's, in simple terms, it's all the economic activity that happened that year. Now, if we were dealing with multiple choice questions, the GDP questions would definitely be the minutia of GDP. So, thinking about what would be counted versus what would not be counted. What would, based on years, based on country of origin, that type of thing. But I think when you're talking about an online learning free response question, there's going to be a lot of emphasis on these three topics: nominal versus real GDP. When we take a look at the sample question of the day, we're going to be looking at making sure you understand the difference between nominal and real GDP. The big difference is nominal GDP uses the prices of that year. Real GDP uses the prices of a base year. So it is a way to comparatively look at how the economy has been doing. And with real GDP, you are taking into account the inflation that might be occurring. And making sure that you're not really using that when you're comparing year to year how well your economy has been doing. You should be familiar with GDP deflator. All it is nominal GDP over real GDP. That calculation might be popular. And then the third thing is real GDP per capita. We know that real GDP is not a perfect statistic. In fact, real GDP, unemployment rate, and inflation rate, all three of those measurements, they kind of each have their issues. That's why we have multiple measurements. Is it possible that they might ask you in a sentence to explain problems with GDP or unemployment or inflation? Yes. So, be familiar with, hey, GDP. One thing is, if you're just looking at GDP and you're not looking at GDP per capita, the United States has a very high GDP, but that doesn't mean that, the wealth is, distributed relatively evenly, or there could be a huge disparity in wealth. There could also be a scenario where, in terms of, you might have a high GDP, but maybe you don't have the best healthcare system, or maybe your people aren't the happiest. So there's lots of different factors that you can say, okay, GDP, yeah, we look at it, yeah, we use it, but it might not be the most amazing statistic, and it's not the end all be all. So that's just what economists kind of want you to focus on and know about. So that's GDP, that's a measurement, definitely going to be on the exam. So make sure that nominal versus GDP, those calculations, and real GDP per capita sometimes is just a little bit better. You're just taking whatever your GDP and dividing it by the population, and that can maybe give you a little bit more of an accurate result as to how the economy is doing for many of the people in your country. Another way to measure the economy is the unemployment rate. And especially now, this is something that we are looking to measure the economy with COVID-19 and the pandemic that we're dealing with. It's very important to understand some key terms when discussing the unemployment rate. You need to know that the labor force is people that are employed and people that are unemployed. The labor force is not just all adults, all working age adults. It is people that are considered employed and people that are considered unemployed. It's very important to understand that people that are considered unemployed are people that are A, out of a job, and people that are B, looking for a job, people that want a job. You are not considered unemployed if you are retired. You are not considered unemployed if you are you made the choice to be a stay at home dad or a stay at home mom. That's not considered unemployed. Unemployed needs to be somebody that is out of work and is looking for work. Okay. So the unemployment rate, it's in red right here, is the number of unemployed people over the labor force. It is not the number of unemployed people over the population. It is the labor force, so that is total amount of people that are employed plus the amount of people that are unemployed. The next thing that you see here is the labor force participation rate. So this is the only time that you're going to be using that working age statistic. So a lot of times they'll give you like a chart and say, okay, here are the people that are working, that have a job. Here are the people that don't have a job but want a job. And here are all the people that are, they say in the United States, for example, working age is 16, that are 16 and above and want to be looking for and are just there. So when we take a look at that population, we only use that for labor force participation, and then we take the total amount of labor force over the population. And what that tells us, ladies and gentlemen, is the percentage of people that are in the labor force. And that can tell you, well, what percentage of people are maybe retired, what percentage of people are maybe going to school and not looking for a job, what percentage of people are being stay-at-home dads or stay-at-home moms. That's the kind of thing that we're looking for here. Okay. Very important that the definition of the being employed means that you work 1 hour a week. Okay. So for most industries, working 1 hour a week is not something that maybe puts food on the table, or takes care of living expenses. So when people take a look at unemployment rate, that could be an issue with unemployment rate. They might ask you that on the AP exam. Hey, what are some issues with the unemployment rate? Well, it's sort of a dicey definition, working 1 hour a week. Just because you drive for Uber 1 hour a week doesn't mean that you might be able to pay for rent or a mortgage or, food on the table, that sort of thing. There's also, if they ask you that question on the AP exam, there's an idea of underemployed. So somebody who's just working for Uber, they might be underemployed. They might not be working as much as they want to. So that's a problem with the unemployment statistic, because you might have a lot of people, especially now, with this COVID-19. People are underemployed. People maybe want to be working more than they can. That they're working a little bit part time, but so that doesn't really truly show how sound your economy is. You also have this situation that they may ask you on the exam of what's called discouraged workers. And these are people that have been looking for a job, and for some reason, maybe their skills are not necessary anymore, or for whatever reason, they kept looking for a job, and then they stopped looking. So they're not considered part of the unemployment rate, but they're discouraged. So that is a reason why your unemployment rate might be lower, like on paper, but in reality, it probably should look to be higher, because you have these people that kind of quit. They gave up. They stopped looking for a job. That's a discouraged worker. So again, something that the AP exam likes to do is they like to ask, hey, here are the ways that we measure the economy. We have multiple ways. What are the problems with it? And that could be a problem. Okay. So that's unemployment rate. They may ask you, if you look over here, I put this box on the bottom right hand side, types of unemployment. Frictional unemployment, if you're going to be unemployed, this is the best reason to be unemployed. These are people that are between jobs. They might be looking for a new job. Um, they don't like their boss, so that's why they left their job. Maybe they don't like their commute, that's why they left their job. Maybe they are trying to get into a different line of work. They were in the fashion industry, now they want to go into the education industry. So frictional unemployment, it's if there is a good kind, it's the best kind of unemployment. We put seasonal unemployment here, so maybe you're a lifeguard in New Jersey, so really you only work May, June, July, August. So that might be a reason why you're unemployed. So frictional unemployment, it's the best kind of unemployment. It's the most low stress, I guess, if you could say, type of unemployment. The second is structural unemployment. This is unemployment that is probably the worst. This is, let's say that you were a cashier. By the way, shout out to all of the people that are working on the front lines, the people that are working in grocery stores and in factories and deliveries, that they are making our life possible. But structural unemployment, if for some reason one of those jobs becomes automated. And so, for example, if they don't have any cashiers and they just use those, self checkout machines for in all stores, that's considered structural unemployment because that person's skills are now no longer needed. There's no jobs, to do that. So we have this population of people that have these particular skills. They can't be used in the economy. So this is something that if you were to say, like, what's the worst type of unemployment, I would say that that's the worst. Cyclical unemployment is the third type. I feel like they're going to ask you a lot about cyclical unemployment on the AP exam. By the way, it's just allergies. I don't have any kind of sickness, just so that you know. That's why I keep sniffing. Cyclical unemployment is simply the economy's in a recession, and that's why you lost your job. Okay, so if somebody loses their job because the economy's in a downturn, right now you can definitely say that we are kind of going into this pandemic type recession. Hopefully, it's only temporary, but people are being laid off because the economy is in a recession, because there isn't people to buy things. The economy is, taking a stall. So cyclical unemployment, they may ask you a question on the AP exam, something like, oh, cyclical unemployment is really high. What must this mean? And then you would say, oh, this must mean that we're in a recessionary gap. By the way, that is a good way for me to kind of segue and take a look at these graphs here. Now, you don't need to draw any graphs on if you're in the online learning, COVID-19, you're not going to need to draw graphs. Any future AP exams that are doing paper and pencil, you certainly do have to draw graphs. But if you're part of the COVID-19, which is why I'm making this video, this is like a one-time, hey, you don't have to draw graphs, but they might have graphs that they have drawn for you, and you definitely need to interpret them. So there's three things, three types that we can show our economy. These are our macroeconomic equilibrium. It's like the godfather graph of macroeconomics. So in macroeconomics equilibrium, there's a few parts. First of all, notice how it says aggregate price level. Notice how it says real GDP on the x-axis. There are three curves. There's always a downward sloping aggregate demand curve. There's always an upward sloping short run aggregate supply curve. And there's always a vertical, straight up and down, long run aggregate supply curve. And that long run aggregate supply curve shows you your potential output. Okay, so this graph can look like in three different ways. It can look like this. So if you're in a recession, notice how your equilibrium is to the left of your long run aggregate supply curve. Or it could be in an inflationary gap. That is where you are to the right of your long run aggregate supply curve. So they might draw, a recessionary gap and say, what must be going on here? Oh, there must be some high cyclical unemployment. Okay, so that's the connection with unemployment and taking a look at these graphs. In terms of these graphs, it's very, 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 very important that you know that the aggregate demand curve is GDP. The expenditure approach of GDP is signified in that aggregate demand curve, and GDP is consumption plus investment spending plus government spending plus net exports. Okay. So that is one of those, I could see on the AP exam, they've done this before. They kind of give you a table and they'll say, oh, here's some consumption spending. Here's another random number that we're going to give you to throw you off. Oh, here's some investment spending. Here's another random number that we're going to give to throw you off. Oh, here's government spending. Here's another random number that we're going to give to throw you off. Oh, and here's some exports and imports, blah, blah, blah. You need to make sure that if they ask you, hey, what is the total GDP based on this table? And by the way, we're throwing some extra numbers in there to throw you off. You want to make sure that you take out the right numbers that for GDP, C plus I plus G plus net exports. Okay, so that's what they're taking a look at here. Now, so that's really Unit 2 is the measurement. Unit 3 starts, showing you these graphs. By the way, the circular flow diagram, you should know that it exists. You should know that the relationship between households and firms, households through factor markets, gives firms the factor of labor and other things like capital and land, and that households are consumers that buy things from firms. Okay, so that's really what you need to know here. Okay, now the reason why I put this table to the top left, like kind of first thing that you should see, is because this is the most important thing from Unit 3. You need to understand fiscal policy. So if you're in a recession or if you're in an inflation, this is your goal. This is where you want to be. So sometimes what the government might do is they might want to, in a recession, shift the aggregate demand curve to the right. In an inflationary gap, they might want to shift the aggregate demand curve to the left. Okay, so the government can't do anything about SRAS. They can do something about aggregate demand. And if they choose to go the way of fiscal policy, then this is something that they would be doing. Okay, so right now, the government might be using fiscal policy. Fiscal policy is when your Congress, so your senators, your House of Representatives, under the direction sometimes by the president, may say, hey, here are some things that we are going to do, and we are going to try to do rather quickly to fix this. Okay. So you can definitely say that since the economy pretty much halted because of COVID-19, we are in a recessionary gap. So, what has the government done? Well, the government has done a form of government transfer. Okay, so these are the three things the government can do. They've kind of done all three of these things in our crisis, but one of the big things is there's an economic stimulus check that if you're somebody that is a working person, or I think actually it goes to everybody over the age of 18 is going to, depending on how much they make, get some form of a economic impact stimulus. And that is money directly given to people. And the idea is with that money that people take that money and spend it. Okay. Now, what's important to know is that when you take a look at the money that people are going to be given, um, if you give people money, they go and spend it, consumption spending goes up, that shifts the aggregate demand curve to the right. Okay. If the government does some direct spending, I believe that the government is trying to do this right now. They might do something like, I think President Trump said he wanted Congress to pass like an infrastructure bill that so government would start spending money and get some projects going. So that's direct spending. So when the government increases government spending, it shifts the AD to the right. If the government decides to decrease taxes for some reason, maybe decreasing the sales tax, decreasing income tax, decreasing any of those things, people have more money in their pocket. So that means that they're going to increase consumption spending and investment spending. That shifts it to the right. Now, what's very, 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 very super, oh my goodness, so important is that so these are the ways that the government can do fiscal policy. If they increase it, that's what happens to the aggregate demand curve. If they decrease it, that's what happens to the aggregate demand curve. It's very important that you understand that there's something called a multiplier. I know that I went over this, I don't know, probably about 62 times, okay? And what you need to know is that with government spending, the multiplier is 1 over MPS. Just as a quick review, MPS and MPC, MPS is the marginal propensity to save and the marginal propensity for MPC to consume. So when you have a dollar, when you get for every dollar that you have, some of that dollar you're going to consume. You're going to take to the grocery store. You're going to order on DoorDash. You're going to do that's consumption. Some of that dollar you're going to save for a rainy day. So maybe, for example, in a country that has a relatively high marginal propensity to consume, maybe your marginal propensity to consume is 0.9. So for every dollar that you get, 90 cents of it goes towards consuming things. DoorDash, groceries, clothes, 90 cents. 10 cents of it goes towards savings. And depending on the country, depending on the culture, depending on the situation, the MPC and MPS may change and they shift all the time. On a free response question, the College Board will tell you, hey, the MPC is this. So if they tell you that the MPC is zero point 0.7, you need to know, well, that must mean that the MPS is 0.3 because they always have to sum up to be 1 because it's one additional dollar. And we use these numbers, these MPC and these MPS, to determine the multiplier. With government spending, so if you're doing this infrastructure project and saying, hey, government spending, we're going to build a new hospital. Every single penny that the government uses to build a new hospital is going to be multiplied, okay, over and over and over again, because all the full part of that government spending is going to be all put towards buying things for the hospital, getting construction, buying hospital beds, painting it, everything that needs, and it's just going to continually multiply. So that's why the multiplier for government spending is 1 over MPS. However, when you're talking about taxes or government transfers, like for example, a stimulus check that people are getting, when you save money on your taxes or when you get a stimulus check from the government, your multiplier is going to be a little bit different. It's going to be lower, okay? Because you're going to take some of that money and say, well, some of it I'm going to save. I'm going to put away for a rainy day. And because I'm doing that, that money's not multiplying. It's staying in my savings account and not doing anything, okay? The only money that's multiplying is the money that I go and use for DoorDash or the money that I go and use to buy groceries or takeout or, that sort of thing. So that is money that gets multiplied. So that's why when you take a look at the multiplier, like for example, let's say if the MPC in a country is 0.8, that means that the MPS is 0.2. Well, 1 over MPS, 1 over 0.2 for government spending, the government spending putting money to go build a hospital, that money is being multiplied by a multiplier of 5. 1 over 0.2 equals 5. However, with taxes and government transfers, if your MPC is 0.8, and we're going to use the tax multiplier for government transfers. So, okay, I get my stimulus check. 20 cents of every dollar is going in a savings account. 80 cents of every dollar I'm going to go consume on, goods and services that I want. So the MPC is 0.8, the MPS is 0.2. 0.8 divided by 0.2 is going to be a multiplier of 4. Four is smaller than the government spending multiplier of five. And why is that? Because when I got my stimulus check or when I got my savings and taxes, some of it went towards, putting in a savings account for a rainy day, and that's not money that's getting multiplied. Very important that you understand the difference between those things. I think that when you take a look at a AP exam, first of all, in regular AP exams, they ask this question a lot. And for like a COVID-19 online learning AP exam that's just free response, I definitely think that they would ask you a lot about this. So make sure that you can say that, in a sentence or two, explain the difference between the two multipliers. Okay, so I was looking for like questions that I think would be sort of similar to what they might ask you, on like a online learning college board AP macro exam. And this is a previously released question from 2011. This was question 3 in 2011. Um, and this test to see, do you understand GDP? So they say, hey, in an economy, here are our prices and our quantities for the year 2009. And here are our prices and quantities for 2010. They are indicating that 2009 is the base year, and they are indicating that the economy sells three things: food, clothing, and entertainment. Okay. So it says the outputs and prices of goods and services in country X are shown in the table above. Assuming that 2009 is the base year, calculate each of the following. So the calculation for the first part is nominal GDP. So for nominal GDP, I'm going to take the 2010 quantity and multiply it by the 2010 price. So this is the actual number that is, exchanged in 2010. So 8 times 2.5, that's 20. 10 times 10, that's 100. 5 times 5, that's 25. Math majors in the room, 20 plus 100 plus 25 is equal to 145. That's your nominal GDP. Now, when I do real GDP for 2010, I'm using 2010's quantities, but I'm multiplying it by 2009's base year. Okay, so using these prices. So I'm going to do 8 times 2.5. Again, that's 20. Then taking 10 times 6, that's 60. And then 5 times 4, that's 20. So noticing that 20 plus 60 plus 20 is 100. So looking at, if you were to compare, you see that, okay, that increase in prices may have something to do with the significant, GDP in 2010. So that's what you're doing for calculations. Make sure on the AP exam that you always show your work. You show where you got the math to do that. That is something that they're interested definitely in seeing. Letter B, if in 1 year the price index is 50 and the next year the price index is 55, what is the rate of inflation from 1 year to the next? So if we take a look at this, going the other way. The inflation rate is the actual change in the price index. So 55 minus 50 is 5 over the original amount. So this is just a percent change. So this means that there has been an increase in 10% inflation. Okay, so percent change formula, we use that a lot when they say, hey, here's the result. This is a big like SAT thing, ACT thing that I've seen. So 10% would be the answer here. Letter C, assume that next year's wage rate is 3% higher than this year's because of inflationary expectations. So the actual inflation rate is 4%. At the beginning of the year, will the real wage be higher, lower, or the same as today? So if you say that it is going to be 3% higher because of inflationary expectations. So if you were expecting 3%, but inflation actually rose by 4%, inflation went up higher than you expected. So my wages, or everybody's wages, went up by 3%, but now goods cost 4% more. So I am not making enough money to buy the same amount of things that I did the year before. So this must mean that real wages will be lower. Last year, I could buy, let's say, 100 cups of Starbucks. This year, I'm only going to be able to buy 96 cups of Starbucks because my wages went up 3%, but the prices of the Starbucks coffee and all of the goods and services went up 4%. That must mean that my real wage is lower. I can't buy as much today as I could last year. And that's that situation. Okay, letter D. Assume that Sarah gets a fixed rate loan. That means that no matter what, the rate for that loan is going to be the same. When the expected inflation rate is 3%, if the actual inflation rate turns out to be 4%, who benefits from the unexpected inflation? Sarah, the bank, nobody, or both? Explain. Well, Sarah is going to benefit from the unexpected inflation because her payments are fixed. So even though that things are more expensive, she locked in a particular percentage rate, and no matter what happens with inflation, that's all she has to pay. So she is actually going to benefit from the situation. If inflation was actually lower than expected, then it would be the bank, okay, that they would be benefiting. Because remember, when you get an interest rate, the interest rate includes the expected inflation and a payment for borrowing money. So both of those things are included. So the bank would be benefiting there. If you expected 3% and it actually was 3%, nobody would be at an advantage. It would be kind of what you expected to happen. Okay, so that's a little bit of a sample of Unit 2 and Unit 3. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to me, and I hope you have a good day.